If you're tackling the Cold War in your history class, there's one massive question you are guaranteed to run into: the Korean War. Was it a victory for the West, or just a tragic, costly failure? Today, we are going to break down all the evidence for both sides of that crucial debate. So let's just jump right in. Was the American policy of containment in Korea a strategic masterstroke, a really necessary defense of freedom? Or was it a brutal, incredibly costly mistake that left a nation permanently scarred and divided? This is the exact kind of question you need to be ready to argue from both perspectives. Now, before we can even judge success or failure, we have to be crystal clear on what the goal was in the first place. The entire American strategy was built around this one big idea: containment. The mission wasn't to destroy communism everywhere, but to literally draw a line in the sand and stop it from spreading any further. And Korea? Well, Korea was the first major military test of this whole idea. To get to the bottom of this, we're going to structure our analysis just like you would for an essay. First, we'll set the stage. Then, we'll build the case for success. And then, we'll look at the case for failure. And finally, we'll lay out all the evidence to get to a final verdict. So, picture this. It's 1950. The Cold War is really starting to heat up. And there's this huge fear in the West, this thing called the domino theory. The idea was pretty simple. If one country falls to communism, its neighbors are just going to topple over one by one. So when communist North Korea invades the South, President Truman and the UN decide they have to do something. This is the moment containment goes from being a theory to a full-blown war. Okay, let's dive into the evidence for why containment in Korea could absolutely be seen as a success. If you're arguing this side of the debate, these are going to be your key points. And the biggest, most fundamental argument is right here. The number one objective, to stop communism from taking over South Korea, was achieved. By the time all the fighting stopped, South Korea was still a non-communist country. So if you're looking at it strictly from the perspective of containment, that is the single biggest check in the win column. And that success wasn't just a fluke. It had a few key parts. Militarily, US and UN forces, even though they were almost pushed completely off the peninsula, they managed to stop the communist advance and push it back. The old pre-war border, the 30th parallel, was more or less put back in place. Now, this sent a really powerful message to the whole world. America was actually willing to fight to back up its policies. And geopolitically, the war helped create this powerful anti-communist alliance in Asia, with the US, South Korea, and a rebuilding Japan forming a strategic team against any more expansion. However, and this is a really big however, there's a completely different and honestly a much darker way to look at this whole thing. To call the Korean War a success, you kind of have to ignore its devastating price tag and its really ambiguous ending. The price of that success was just staggering. We're talking millions of lives, soldiers and civilians, lost. Entire cities were just flattened. The sheer human cost, not to mention the massive financial expense of the war, leads a lot of historians to ask, was a stalemate really worth this level of destruction? The key point for this side of the argument is that containment didn't actually solve the Korea problem. It just froze it in time. The country was still split by one of the most dangerous, most militarized borders in the entire world. And get this, the war didn't even end with a peace treaty. It was an armistice, which is just a ceasefire. So technically, North and South Korea are still at war today. On top of that, far from weakening communism in the region, the war actually helped turn North Korea into one of the world's most isolated and militarized communist states, propped up by China and the Soviet Union. And this really gets to the core of the debate. How do you define success? Is it preventing the absolute worst-case scenario, the entire peninsula falling to communism? Or do you define failure by not being able to achieve a positive outcome, like a unified, peaceful Korea? The tricky part is both of these things are kind of true at the same time. So where does all this leave us? Well, as a student of history, your job isn't really to just pick a side and say, this is right. It's to understand the weight of the evidence on both sides and then form a really smart, nuanced conclusion. So look, this table is basically your cheat sheet for the entire debate. On the left, you've got what looks like a clear, strategic victory based on the original goals of containment. The line was held, alliances got stronger, a message was sent. But on the right, you have a catastrophic human tragedy and a huge political failure. A divided nation, an endless state of war, and a newly dug-in communist enemy. A really good historical analysis has to be able to hold both of these truths in its hands at the same time. And so, we end up right where we began. Was containment in Korea a necessary evil, a brutal but ultimately successful defense against communist expansion? Or was it the moment the world just decided that the permanent, violent division of a nation was a price worth paying? As with so much of history, the answer really depends on what you choose to measure.